Doctors of Reddit. What was your how the FCK did you survive that moment? I was working in the emergency department when a toddler came in after falling out of a 3-story window completely unharmed. The sad thing was they were from a rough neighborhood and the mum hadn't noticed for about half an hour. Apparently the friendly apartment pot smokers found him, checked him over and sat with him for half an hour, and when mum didn't show up went to find her. The child was admitted overnight mostly for social reasons, but it's just amazing how well kids bounce. I was a surgical resident in a small town hospital. We got paged to see a patient for a speared piece of driftwood through the leg. We were thinking it was a nicked femoral artery and discussing if this poor kid needed amputation when we saw him. He was standing on the skewered leg taking a piss. Turns out the wood missed every single one of the vital vessels and no fracture, just muscular damage. Every time I think this question, the answer is usually meth. One guy got hit in the face hard enough to let air into his brain cavity and was being an absolute asshole, which seemed to be normal for him, and literally asked, "Got any meth?" When I offered some pain relief, to my understanding, he recovered without any need for surgery. Not a doctor, yet, but I worked in a trauma center as a scribe before starting med school. Basically, I was attached at the hip with a doctor to do their documentation. One guy wrecked his car into a wooden fence, and a wooden fence post went in his mouth and came out the back of his neck. It was the kind of fence post that was double the size of his mouth. It had basically pushed all of the important anatomy to the side as it impaled him. There were consulting doctors for like 10 different specialties working on this guy in the hospital. Several weeks later, after he fully recovered, he walked back in the emergency department to thank everyone. Emergency nurse. Once had a guy come in who had been cutting a tree with a chainsaw when it hit a knot in the wood and kicked up into his neck. Finished cutting the tree because he knew his wife would make him get rid of the chainsaw. Put a towel on it and drove himself to the hospital. CT showed no vascular damage. Simple washout and home the next day. One of the paramedics who saw him said to his patient, "That's a real emergency, why don't we ever get those?" Edit, location Australia, Queensland. Not a doctor but paramedic. Once went a car wreck where a drunk drove headfirst into the corner of a brick bridge at 100 miles per hour. Took a huge wedge out of the bottom of the bridge and left the car about 1/4 of its normal length. All the impact was on the driver's side. Turned up only 2 minutes after the crash and fully expected it to be a fatality. Walked round to the driver's side and somehow he was fully conscious but squeezed into the only space left in the car. Took almost 3 hours to get him out, and on extracting him out he had absolutely nothing wrong with him other than being a pissed up hole. Still think, how the fuck did he survive that? Not a doctor, but a fellow worker took a 35-pound steel plate being propelled by 3,770 pounds per square inch, equivalent to 188. 5 car tires, to the face. Sent him 15 feet in the air, and 40 feet back. Broke every bone in his face. Lived and back to work 8 months later. Edit, my math with car tires is awful. I'd meant to try and put it in terms I thought Redditors may understand. Also, till car tires optimal SI rating is 30 to 35. It was 26 MPa. 5,500 meters hole with 27/8 THS tubing, on a 6.5 inches cased hole, with roughly 300 to 350 of 3 inches flow line to a 3 inches 10,000 pounds per square inch rated manifold. It's a lot of pressure. Not a doctor, yet, but during one of my night shift as a medical student, I had to take in charge a patient who came to the ER for A and NBSP, car accident and NBSP. Well, that's quite common. What is not is that he came by himself, from Fort Mess, by calling a taxi because his car was absolutely wrecked in the accident. Normally, when your car ends up upside down, after 2 or 3 rollovers at 60 km per hour, which the patient did, you are not really fine. However, he was totally okay. No broken bone, no head trauma, no abdominal pain, nothing. He just came to the ER because he had little derm abrasions over his knees and one elbow, and an NBSP, it hurts when it rubs against my clothes, and NBSP, 3 band-aids later, and he was good to go. Not a doctor, but a friend's story. He'd been feeling like shit for a long time, went to the doctor. Doctor ordered a bunch of blood tests, and ordered them on a rush basis. The lab calls the doctor to bitch him out. Why the fuck did you make us rush these tests? Doctor is confused. Lab is like, the guy is clearly dead, so what's the fucking rush? Doctor calls him, tells him to not drive but to get himself to emergency ASAP. Guy was a type 1 diabetic, hadn't realized it until way later in life, and apparently his blood work suggested he was a corpse rather than a living person. He's still doing fine. I am not a doctor, but when I around 23 I was stubborn and didn't go to the doctors for feeling weak and numb all the time with some blackouts. I brushed it off until I literally couldn't get up to walk to the bathroom, thinking it was just a cold or flu. When I finally made it to the ER my blood count was at 3, regular is around 14. Doctor said he didn't know how I was alive still. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.